My name is Petra. I'm from the Netherlands. Years ago, I worked in a home for older people as a nurse. I had the night shift. We were together drinking coffee on the second floor. All of a sudden, we heard a loud bang, so we thought a client had fallen. We decided that I would take the second floor and my colleague would take the first. Maybe we could find out what happened. While my colleague walked down the stairs, I had looked at the monitor which was on the second floor, and I saw someone in the department on the ground floor. He was inside the closed department. You could walk in over there, but you had needed a code to get out. People with dementia lived there. We watched for a while, and the guy was stuck. He couldn't get out. We decided to go inside a room on the second floor of one of our clients because you needed a special key to go inside. So we thought that was more safe. We explained to her what was going on. She was perfectly capable of understanding the situation, and of course we called 112. I explained the situation. They told me they would come right away. I called my husband, who also had the night shift as a security guard in another town not too far away from us. He was just talking with the cops while I called 112 and said they were on their way. When I hung up, I had looked outside and I saw that guy climbing out the window, so I called back. They asked if something changed. The police arrived and we did a walk with them throughout the whole building. The guy broke the door in the kitchen. His stuff to break the door was there on the ground. Police couldn't really do much. I don't even know if they found the guy. Later that day, we had heard that they were riding around the building 2 hours before the guy went in. And the guy had walked all over the ground floor, all while we were having our coffee on the second floor. That's a pretty scary thought. The next day I had one more night shift, and though I don't have that much to fear, it was still pretty scary. So I asked if I could bring my 2 dogs. We had 2 Rottweilers at the time, and they were actually okay with that. So I had brought them with me the next night. Nothing happened. The dogs had walked with me the whole night, and of course I let them outside now and then to do their thing. The other night, 2 other colleagues had the night shift, and guess what? They came back. They had robbed the safe. I always thought that the guy we had was to just look around and see if he could get away, but they had planned to come back for the safe the next night. But I'm guessing the 2 Rottweilers scared them off. I wouldn't go inside if there were 2 dogs like that either if I didn't know them. Later on, I always brought my dogs if I ever did the night shift over there. Most colleagues would be happy if they worked with me because they felt safe with the dogs, and so did I. The funny thing was that the dogs knew the route that we always walked. After a few times, I didn't even put their leash on. They just knew. If we needed to help a client, they just waited in the hallway until I was done. A few clients knew it because I told them, knowing that they love dogs. So when they needed our help, the dogs went with us in their apartment. Both the dogs and clients loved that. In my own personal experience, Rottweilers are known as friendly. But don't mess with them or the people they love. Then they'll change. No other weird things happened after that. My name is Seth, and I work as a security guard in Oakland, California. One morning I came into work, and the janitorial supervisor came and talked to me. Let's call him George for privacy reasons. George had asked if I knew who was working the night before, and I told him no, but I can rewind the cameras and see who was on shift. I asked what this was regarding to, and George had told me that his janitorial staff was actually attacked. George had told me at around 1 a.m. while the janitorial staff was getting off, a man who looked homeless was yelling and throwing rocks at the staff while they were trying to get in their vehicles. The majority of the janitorial staff on the night shift are all women, and their vehicles are parked right in front of the building that we guards watch over, so we can see pretty much everything outside, and whatever we can't, the camera can catch it. So when George told me what happened, I told him that I would look into it and then write an accident report on it. Once George walked away, I had started rewinding the cameras. I rewound the cameras an hour before the incident, and I had saw my coworker sitting on the desk asleep and the janitor still working. I had sped the camera until I saw janitorial banging on the door, and my coworker was still asleep. I switched to a different view of the cameras, and I saw outside of the building where a tall figure was approaching the ladies. One was banging on the door until another janitorial staff who looked like she was yelling at the other was banging on the door, and then she stopped banging and then ran away. The tall figure came closer to view, and I saw that he was now throwing and yelling at janitorial. The janitorial ran into their vehicles, and one by one started to speed off. I can still see on the cameras the homeless man screaming and tossing things at janitorial while they drove off. After I reviewed the cameras, I then wrote my report and called my boss right away. My boss was furious and then said, "Who was working at the desk that night, and how come he didn't see it?" I replied, "I don't know. That's why I called you to see if you know who was working on shift last night." He put me on hold and then took a look at the schedule. It was Mike. Fuck. That guy always gives me problems and he always calls off. The one night that he should have called off, I wouldn't have minded if I could have got someone who was more responsible and then prevented this from happening, he told me. I let my boss know that I did a report on the incident, and I told him I'll talk to the janitorial staff to get more details. Once 5 p.m. came around, the janitorial staff came in and I had asked them about the incident that took place the night before. Reminder: the janitorial staff are almost all women, and they speak little to no English. I asked them what happened the night before in Spanish, and they told me some crazy guy had started yelling at them, calling them bitches, and then throwing rocks at them. One of the janitors, who we'll call Lucia, told me that she was banging on the door to get the guard who was asleep. She was trying to get them to help them, but to no avail. Then one of the other janitors yelled out, "What are you doing? He's getting closer. Forget it, he's not gonna help us. Just run to your car." I asked Lucia if she had tried to call the cops when she got in her car, but she told me no. She thought that Mike, who was the security guard that was asleep, would, but he never did. Later on, George had informed me that he was going to report the incident to headquarters, and then informed them of our negligence. I don't blame him. The fact that his staff was put at risk and we didn't even do anything, I would have done the same thing. I called my boss again and gave him more details, as well as letting him know that George will be reporting us. My boss just sighed and said, "I don't blame him. Whatever happens, happens. Our job is to observe and report, and that didn't happen last night. Thanks again, Seth." I really felt bad for the ladies, and even though they were afraid, they still came to work and did what they had to do. I ran into Lucia a week later to check up on her, and she told me that she's still scared about what happened and it was really traumatic, but that she has kids to feed and she can't let this stop her from working. So yeah, I guess that's the story. I was a security guard for an old building that the government used. It was a big secret what the building was actually used for, though. Some say it has to do with aliens. Others said it was used as a place to experiment on people. Who really knows? Anyhow, I had drove my Honda Civic to the lot. I then got out and approached the building. Right away, I could tell this wasn't going to be easy. This building had something attached to it. I went from being okay with the job to now being frightened within seconds. I slowly approached the doorknob and then gave it a push. The door creaked open, leading to a dark, abandoned hallway. Papers were all over the floor, and desks were knocked over. As I walked inside the building, I got the sensation that I was being watched. Hello? I called out into the dark. I started to search the first floor, and then I made my way to the second floor. That's when I noticed a key on the ground. It had 3rd floor labeled to it. So I had walked up towards the door leading to the 3rd floor. I unlocked the door and then made my way up the steps. That's when I saw about 30 to 60 rooms filled with padded cells. Some of these cells had remains on the ground. I got chills as for the first time it clicked that I was inside of some sort of hospital for the insane. I knew that I didn't feel right about this building. I heard weird noises, and at first I thought it was just the building settling, but now I know it had to be haunted. I immediately left the 3rd floor and was making my way down to the 1st floor when I had heard the basement door then swing open. I watched as the door was about 50 feet next to me. There was no way in hell I was going down there. I ran as fast as I could out of the building. I'd called my boss and I just told him I couldn't do it. As I got in my car, no joke, I turned around and I saw a man in a padded vest smiling at me from the window of the 3rd floor. I peeled the hell out of there as fast as I could, screaming, "Never again." To this day, I'm still not sure why they wanted this building protected or who the hell that person was in the window. Honestly, there aren't very many spooky situations that security guards get into, but I think I have one or two. At a hospital in Tucson, I had worked the overnight shift with short notice and minimal training. Now, the multi-level parking garage isn't too bad, and the fairly open property with a handful of blind corners are standard, but the interior is just something else. The 1st floor has nothing worth mentioning, but literally everything else might as well be horror movie inspired. The 2nd floor used to be a patient wing where they would have their own rooms, beds, toilets, you get the point. Now everything has been taken out, meaning pipes sticking out the floor, empty hospital beds that were all taken, showers directly behind the entrance doors, all of which has to be checked by security. Oh, and of course the lights on that floor don't work, and the fire alarm battery was dying, so you'd hear an occasional high-pitched beep. Now the 3rd floor was an interesting case. They never told me exactly what happened up there, but I was told as a security guard not to go up there. All I know is apparently the patients up there are usually not very friendly, and they like to smoke up there. Needless to say, after dealing with the 2nd floor, I didn't ask very many questions. The 4th floor was the engineering room. Low-hanging pipes, elevator controls, constant loud noises, and a locked door that I was always told to leave alone. Needless to say, I had every horror movie box checked while I was there. But here's what they don't tell you about living in a horror movie. If nothing ever happens, the anxiety never really goes away until you're just not in that situation anymore. Up until about a year ago, I worked at a grocery chain called Stop & Shop. For those of you who aren't from the Northeast of the United States, Stop & Shop is like our version of Kroger's. I was and still am a working college student. My availability was only 6 p.m. to closing, which in this case was midnight. Stop & Shop wasn't my favorite job. I dealt with a lot of shitty customers and coworkers, one of which once broke into my locker and put a used tampon in the pocket of my apron. But that's a whole different story. My job was walking distance from where I lived, which made it really convenient since I didn't have a car. One Friday night, I was closing as usual with my supervisor, and we were running later than we usually did. My supervisor and I finally got the remaining customers out of the store, clocked out, and left. I left before my supervisor and began walking home. After a long, frustrating day of annoying customers, it felt great to just walk through the fresh winter air. I spent a few minutes shuffling through my phone's playlist to find a song to walk home to. My fiance had me on George Michael's Kicks, so I put on the song Faith, popped in one of my headphones, and then turned the volume all the way up. I had made my way down the main road, careful to not slip on any of the ice. One thing that's really important to know about me is I'm a very anxious person, and while it's definitely a problem most of the time, it does help make me constantly aware of my surroundings. That's when I saw an approaching car slowing down on the deserted main road, and I automatically went on high alert. It was a black car that came to a slow stop against the sidewalk I was on, about 10 feet behind me. I immediately clutched my phone in my hand and brought it out of my pocket. If there wasn't any ice covering the sidewalk and my feet didn't hurt, I probably would have ran. Instead, I opted to try and pretend that I wasn't afraid, which I don't think worked because I had picked up my pace after the car stopped. It was then that I heard a man's voice call out to me.
"Hey, it's cold out here. You want a ride?"
The man said. I kept walking away from him up the street, pretending I didn't hear him and just hoping he would go away. It didn't work. A few moments later, I heard the car tires crushing the ice on the road, and then turned around to see what he was doing. He was now driving with the car in reverse. When he caught up to me, he had rolled down the passenger seat window some more. He was a black man, maybe in his mid to late 30s. He had looked at me and I stopped, prompting him to stop his car as well.
Hey, let me give you a ride,
he said through the car window. I didn't know what to say. I wanted to be polite because even though I was scared, I tried to be rational. All he did was offer a girl a ride home who was walking in the cold at night. Also, with the possibility of him being a kidnapper or a rapist, it was really best to not piss him off on the empty street. No thank you, I said politely but firmly.
Well, do you have a long way to walk?
I hesitated for a second. I was trying to figure out what to say that would get him to leave me alone and not give away which street that I lived on. I'm okay, I insisted. Thanks though. As I finished thanking him, I had started walking again, now putting both headphones in with the song now paused. It was more of a way to signal that I was done talking to him. He didn't say anything, but I knew that he was watching me walk away. I felt relieved when I got a few more feet away from his car. I heard the sound of his tires driving away. Unfortunately, the situation was only getting worse. As I had started walking past the entrance of a car dealership, I saw the same car making a U-turn in the middle of the street at the corner of my eye when I turned slightly. He pulled up to the sidewalk yet again, this time a few feet in front of me. The man then opened the driver's seat door and got out of the car. It was at that point I was actually afraid I wouldn't make it home that night. He then looked at me with this weird expression on his face. He had this really focused look while trying to look casual. It's really hard to describe. He started walking up to me. This kind of situation had never happened to me before, but I always thought of dangerous hypothetical situations in my head. I guess thinking about those situations prepared me to an extent, because before I even realized it, my phone was already against my ear, like I was on the phone with someone even though I wasn't. When he came closer to me, he saw my phone in my hand, and he must have realized someone could know where I am right now, or I could be calling 911. That's the only explanation I can think of, because when he looked at my phone, his demeanor totally changed. He stopped in his tracks with a worried look on his face, and then asked me,
"Oh, are you on the phone with someone right now?"
"Mm-hmm," I replied, looking at him with my phone still against my face, and my other hand casually in my pocket. Without saying anything else, the man immediately turned around, got back in his car, and then started to drive up the street. I had walked slowly at first, letting some distance grow between us. But as soon as I felt safer, I had walked up the street as fast as I could without slipping. I frantically tried to call my dad, who I thought was home at the time. He didn't pick up. I then tried to call my sister and my fiance. I didn't feel like I was in danger anymore, but my adrenaline was through the roof, and I wanted to hear from someone who would make me feel better. I gave up calling after I couldn't get in touch with anyone, and I just kept walking. I was finally getting ready to turn onto another street when I passed an empty parking lot and saw the same man leaning against his car looking over at me.
"Hey,"
was all he said in a flat tone when I walked by. At this point, I was finally completely freaked out. I didn't have my phone out anymore, so I couldn't pretend I was talking to someone again, and I was also significantly closer to my house. If he decided to get into his car and follow me, there wasn't any detour I could take to try and lose him. I was now on the verge of tears, and that's when I had decided to call 911. I called 911 and told them the situation. The officer on the other line stayed on the phone with me until I got into my house. After that, an officer came to my house and asked me a bunch of questions about the man. He had also asked me about his car and where I last saw him. All of the details I either didn't remember or were way too vague. He said that he would at least patrol the area for him. I'm not really sure if he actually did or not, but it made me feel better at the time. From that point, I needed a ride to and from work every shift until I got my schedule changed to day shifts just a few weeks later. The college semester ended, and I was planning on skipping a semester anyway, and that experience only reinforced my decision. The more I think about that situation, I really think about how lucky I was. I was in the perfect position to be taken, but I actually used some quick thinking that really de-escalated the situation. I moved in with my fiance, and I now have a pocket knife and pepper spray for whenever I walk home at night from my new job. It's something to remember if you haven't called 911. If you don't have anything to defend yourself against someone, either let someone know where you are or pretend that they know where you are. It can potentially save your life.